Welcome to Quarantine History of Otter County. I'm your host, Chris Schuelke, and today we are going to talk about the 101st anniversary of the great Fergus Falls cyclone. So Fergus Falls residents greeted 1919 cautiously optimistic, as the previous 2 years had been very difficult. When the United States declared war on Germany in April 1917, over 2,000 county men and women answered the call to serve. 87 died, including 36 killed in action. The next year, the flu pandemic wreaked havoc. In October 1918, Fergus Falls Mayor George Frankberg and City Health Officer Dr. J.G. Vegan closed all churches, theaters, and places of amusement. In addition, all public meetings and gatherings were prohibited. Still, 235 Otter County residents died during the flu pandemic. So you had the war, the flu. When the calendar turned to 1919, people were ready for better times, and the community responded. In the spring, city officials proposed constructing a new armory and community center and city hall, all under one roof. The Fergus Falls Commercial Club was already making plans for a big July 4th celebration. And in an effort to entice visitors to the city, the club proposed paving downtown streets and installing street name signs to, quote, assist strangers and visitors to the city in finding their way around town. By mid-June, a warm and wet spring had turned into a hot and sticky summer. To beat the heat, people packed area lakes and slept on their porches instead of a sweltering house. And then Sunday, June 22nd, it dawned as hot and sticky as the previous days. But by mid-afternoon, early warnings of stormy weather became evident. People were actually hopeful a good thunderstorm would usher in cooler and drier weather. But then, a strange continuous thunder began that Myrtle Danielson described as many steel drums rolling across the floor of a distant palace. After an hour or so, the thunder turned into an angry growling. It then started to rain, heavily. Elmer Paulson said the rain was as big as dollars. It rained so hard that Catherine Kaditz recalled it seemed as if the river was picked up and laid down upon the town. Suddenly, a giant funnel cloud appeared in the vicinity of Vine and Summit. And as the massive tornado moved north and east, it ripped apart everything in its path, leaving a swath of destruction unbelievable to behold. Homes and businesses were reduced to rubble. Cars flipped about like toys, trees uprooted and twisted. Fully 2/3 of Fergus Falls was damaged or destroyed, 60 killed, and hundreds injured. And with no early warning system, harrowing stories of escape and tragedy emerged as people scrambled for safety. And now join me as we hear the first of our stories. Paul and Mabel Paulson were living in Tyler, Minnesota, when a tornado devastated that community in August 1918, killing 36. After that trauma, they moved to Fergus Falls, where Mr. Paulson became manager of the Fergus Falls Fruit Company. They moved to a house on West Cavour. That Sunday, June 22nd, 1919, they recognized all the signs of a bad storm and immediately took shelter in their basement. And when they heard the familiar, terrible roar of the cyclone, they thought it would just be a matter of seconds before the house would tumble down upon them. They cowered in a corner and prayed that God would spare them. The house shook and swayed, but somehow it remained in one piece. The nearby Catholic church, however, was completely destroyed. Catherine Kaditz, daughter of hotel owner Charles and Ida Kaditz, had just graduated from Fergus Falls High School. Befitting a young woman of her social standing, her parents had gifted her a brand new car as a graduation present. So that Sunday afternoon, June 22nd, Catherine and her boyfriend Harold Vandersloot decided to cool off by taking a drive around town. As the rain came down, they drove to the Kaditz house here at 226 West Summit. And then they pulled into the garage. And just as Harold shut the door, all hell broke loose. A deafening noise hurt their ears, and heavy timbers began flying around like matchsticks. Catherine and Harold threw themselves into the grease pit, which protected them from the debris. Within minutes, it was over. And when they went outside, the house was damaged, but more or less intact. And everything was eerily quiet, except for a whirring noise coming from the tracks below the Union Avenue Bridge. It was from a car that had been blown over the bridge onto the tracks below. And although the car was completely destroyed, the starter motor was still humming. And now let's find out how Mayor George Frankberg responded to the effects of the cyclone. Fergus Falls Mayor George Frankberg and his wife Mary, along with their children Harold and Georgiana, and guests May Lundquist and her son Forden, were sitting down to Sunday dinner at the Frankbergs' home at 512 West Lincoln. The meal got off to an inauspicious start when the dining room chandelier fell into a bowl of mashed potatoes. After a good laugh and some cleaning up, they were just about ready to eat when it started raining. This prompted Mr. Frankberg to ask the kids to help him close windows. As they were doing this, a thunderous noise started as if a freight train was heading to the house. Everyone scrambled to the basement, and after what seemed a lifetime, all was quiet. Frankberg went upstairs and luckily found the house more or less intact. He began sweeping up broken glass when he was startled by a loud banging at the side door. A man was frantically waving him to hurry. Mayor Frankberg, the mayor said. You won't believe this, but the Grand Hotel is flatter than a pancake. And sure enough, the splendor of the 1883 Grand Hotel was gone, reduced to a pile of rubble. And when the mayor surveyed the damage a few moments later, he could hear the cries and moans of people trapped. 5 people died when the Grand was torn asunder, including legendary retired Sheriff Alonzo Brandenburg, who had gone down to the Grand to get the Sunday paper. The mayor found Fergus Falls damaged or destroyed. Over 60 people dead, hundreds injured. It was the greatest crisis the city had ever faced. Nothing could have prepared Mayor Frankberg for such a situation. So to prevent looting and to aid in the search for victims and survivors, the mayor asked the governor to send in the National Guard. Mayor Frankberg also declared a state of emergency, so he presented a proclamation for martial law to R.J. Underwood to print in Monday's Fergus Falls Daily Journal. The proclamation read in part, "My fellow citizens, one of the worst calamities that Minnesota has ever known has devastated Fergus Falls. Much of the city has been destroyed, scores killed and hundreds injured. Nothing could have prepared us for such an event." The mayor went on to declare that each and every person be off each and every street and alley of our city at or before 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. commencing Monday, June 23rd, until further notice. In exceptional cases, only will passes or permits be issued. But I caution you, do not waste your time in applying for a permit unless your excuse is extraordinary. With courage and resilience, our citizens will rebuild, and we will have a bigger and better Fergus Falls. And now join me as we conclude this week's episode of Quarantine History of Ottertail County. A bigger and better Fergus Falls became the mantra for recovery as residents and city leaders rolled up their sleeves and went about the business of rebuilding. In addition to property loss, the cyclone severely damaged the city's infrastructure, including the loss of both the Union and Court Street bridges. Both bridges were rebuilt and opened just a year later in June 1920. And within a year, many churches were either repaired or rebuilt. In 1921, some 70 businessmen invested to build the Orpheum Theater, build the most complete theater in the Northwest. After efforts to take away the county seat from Fergus Falls failed, a new Ottertail County Courthouse opened in December 1921. And plans for a new Northern Pacific Railroad station were put in motion soon after the cyclone destroyed the old depot. When a new station opened in October 1920, it was considered one of the most modern stations along the line. Well, that does it for this week's version of Quarantine History from Ottertail County. This is the 101st anniversary of the Fergus Falls Cyclone. And as the Historical Society slowly reopens to the public, we will continue to offer Quarantine History of Ottertail County, History by the Highway. Don't forget to subscribe and become a member of the Historical Society to support us during these difficult times. Thank you for joining me. I'm Schuelke. We'll see you next time on Quarantine History of Ottertail County.